I started writing to John in September of 2011. It took until November of 2020 to finally get him to agree to do a Zoom program, which was wonderful. And he was in conversation with Cassandra King Conroy. That was 9 years it took me. I got David McCullough in 5 years. So, but David didn't write 47 consecutive #1 bestsellers, which had been translated into 50 languages. He didn't win the Harper Lee Prize twice, and he was honored by the Library of Congress. However, John Grisham he's just extraordinary, and he is also a whole lot of fun. And we have got Polly Buxton, the owner with Julian of Buxton Books, which we brought on campus, and I think will be my legacy, because Polly can talk about books in ways that few people can. And when I said, Polly, I'd like you to be the one in conversation with John, I won't say she swooned, but she came close. And I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Please welcome John Grisham and Polly Buxton.
Thank you.
Good evening. Hold on, I think it is. Thank you, Anne. Thank you to the Charleston Library Society, and thank you to the membership. Thank you, John, for being here.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
He's the pro here, thank goodness. I can't say that I have been a little extra nervous about coming on this stage tonight in front of all of you, and I've had there's been so much encouragement from the people who shop in our store and the membership that we see at events, and it's just been so empowering. So thank you to all of you who have just sent so many good wishes for this partnership that we have, for the bookstore, for the Library Society, and the next chapter. It really gives me great hope, history and hope. It's just really incredible to be here. 275 years. It's been hard to get that number out of my head. John and I were backstage talking about the power of history and what that means. We're looking back, we're looking forward, but I'm reminding myself to be very present in this wonderfully special moment. So let's get started.
Well, first of all, it's always fun to be in Charleston. I've been here several times over the years, never spent much time here. I've often thought about using Charleston as a setting for a novel, which I do that occasionally for places I haven't been, because it gives me an excuse to go there. And I've done, a couple of books in Brazil, 2 books in Italy. I've used New Orleans and Washington, New York a lot. Mississippi is another story. Several years ago, I wrote a book and I set the main character in Savannah, because I've never been to Savannah. And so I went there and hung out and got to know the city. And so I'm thinking about one day maybe setting a book in Charleston. To begin with, though, I have to have a good murder and a good murder victim. So I'm kind of looking. So be careful what you ask for, okay? You may wind up in a novel. Happy to be here.
We sadly do have a few of those here. So
we do.
We don't need any new ones.
There's no shortage anywhere. We have plenty of those.
Yeah. And no stealing of rare manuscripts. We're not into that either.
I saw some rare manuscripts today here in the library, and it always kind of gets me excited at the thought about stealing them, because I've done that in one novel, and they stole them from the manuscripts from the Princeton Library, and it was all fiction. In fact, I deliberately didn't go to the library when I wrote the book, because I didn't want to inspire anybody to try to do what I did in fiction. And so the book came out at Camino Island 6 or 7 years ago, and I kept thinking, I wonder if the folks at Princeton Library have a sense of humor, and they do. I finally got the letter from the librarian and said, "We really enjoy your book. You got nothing right, I said, good, that's what I wanted. Would you come to Princeton and see the real F. Scott Fitzgerald manuscripts under guard and do a program? And I said, sure. And we had a wonderful visit. But rare books and manuscripts still get me pretty excited.
I have a Princetonian in my family. That's Julian. That's if you ever one wonders what the tiger is at Buxton Books, it's the Princeton tiger. And we loved Camino Island. Julian and I read books aloud to one another. I read to him. That way he knows that he has my full attention if I'm reading to him. And we read Camino Island together, but he kept interrupting me if he thought you were wrong about the Firestone Library.
Oh, yeah. Totally wrong. Intentionally wrong. In all my fiction, I've never been known for my accuracy. And so I'm a really lazy researcher. I mean, when I was in law school, I learned to hate research. And I tried to avoid it for 10 years as a lawyer. And now that I'm a writer, I just don't want to do it. And I write fiction, and it's so much easier just to fictionalize a town, a street, a hotel, or whatever. Just make it up and keep going. And I hate to stop and go check the facts. So I stay in trouble all the time.
Now, see, I gave you far more credit than that.
No.
I told Julia you had done it intentionally to protect those Fitzgerald manuscripts.
No. I'm not that smart.
Oh. Well, you say that you start a book every January 1st.
Yes.
Is that true?
I start the next legal thriller every year on January the 1st. That's been that way for 20-something years now.
Wow. You started one this year?
17 days ago, yeah.
Okay, so we're 17 days in.
We were at the beach celebrating New Year's with the kids and grandkids, and I disappeared for a couple of hours with the laptop, and I make myself do it every year on January the 1st, and I miss very few days. It's at least 5 days a week, sometimes 6, never on Sunday. The goal is about 1,000 words a day, and that takes, from 3 to 5 hours, and early in the morning. And then, again, the goal is to finish by July the 1st and turn it in, a good draft. And it takes about a month to fight with the copy editors, people I really despise. All writers do, by the way. And then
the copy editors or the editors? Are they actually changing the story or just?
I'm really lucky. My editor is my agent. Mm-hmm. He was my editor at Doubleday for the first 4 books. Not A Time to Kill, but The Firm, The Pelican Brief, The Client, The Chamber were the next 4 books after A Time to Kill, early 90s. And he was my editor-in-chief of Doubleday. And then in 1995, my first agent died suddenly. And so I went to my editor, who was by then a close friend, and I said, "You are now an agent." And he said, "Okay, let's go." And so he edits the books before I officially turn them in. But he gives it a real strong line edit with a lot of far too many suggestions, and we go back and forth. My wife also has already weighed in by then with some really ugly suggestions, and so.
Is she your first reader?
She's the first reader, and she reads with a big red magic marker, and she takes way too much delight in finding mistakes or problems with the book. And we have some very healthy discussions. When our kids were little, they're married with kids. Our kids would run downstairs, to hear angry voices, and we'd be in the kitchen, having a disagreement, and the kids would stop and say, "Oh God, it's just a book fight. It's not."
That's great.
Can't you people have a real parental fight, and just a book fight? So but we go through that process. She has a very good eye and ear. First of all, for story. I don't really start a story until I pitch the story to her. And I'm always pitching ideas for stories, and she's always saying no. She takes great delight in saying no. But between my wife and my longtime editor agent and the publisher at Doubleday, we're all very close. And from the very beginning, I've always said the rules are simply this: anybody can say anything. You can, criticism, suggestion, it doesn't matter. You're free to speak and I'll listen to you. Don't always agree, but we can always go back and forth. So the book gets that kind of a vetting as I'm actually writing it. And then when the copy editors chop it up, I get it back, and they print them in September, and they go on sale the last week in October because, as you know, 1/3 of all books are sold at Christmas time. So all your big writers come out in late October, early November for the Christmas market. So that's kind of my schedule for this year.
We like that.
Yeah, I know you do.
It's very good.
You really want 2 a year. I know what you're thinking. You want 2 books a year. Okay, I've been doing that.
We would not mind you having 2 books.
There's only 1 book this year. I didn't write a book last fall. I wrote the legal thriller. I'm writing the legal thriller now to come out next fall.
So that's your pace. You write 1 a year between January 1st and July 1st. Does it energize you, or do you need that other 6 months to rest and to refuel and look for your next subject?
I don't need to rest. I mean, I haven't worked 40 hours a week in 30 years. I mean, it's not. It's not that. I mean, I don't
I've
work.
been working those extra 40
Yeah, I know.
hours.
You
Booksellers
really
work 80 hours.
You're a bookseller. Yeah. You have to work.
Yeah.
You have to do the hours. It's retail, right? Know what happens invariably by Labor Day when I'm done. I take off August, and we do summer stuff, and invariably I'm bored by Labor Day. So I started writing kids' books, sports books, the Camino books. There are 2 of those. There'll be 1 more in the series in a couple of years. There's always another idea for a book not related to the law, not a legal thriller, and so I'll do that in the fall. So I've been doing 2 books a year and COVID really helped because I had nothing else to do.
Couldn't travel.
I couldn't go anywhere. So I just got in the swing of doing 2 books a year, but I took off this fall. I didn't write. My wife really wanted me to take some time off, so only 1 book this year.
So do you have, for your research, you said you don't like research, but I feel that you always are paying attention. I mean, there's so much good information in your stories, even though it's very much storytelling and it's fiction. His booksellers live very glamorous lives that I don't think we live. This is pretty glamorous, I have to say. This moment is glamorous for me. But most of my life is not this glamorous. Your booksellers are very glamorous in your books. But tell us, what do you do for your research? Is it digital? Do you cut magazine articles out and newspaper articles? How do you gather the information for your next idea?
Most of the story ideas come from news magazines or newspaper accounts of true crime or true reality, dealing with lawyers and law firms that blow up and litigation. I'm captivated by the opioid litigation that's raging now. I keep wanting to write that book, but it's too big. I just can't get my head around a story that will cover the victims, the doctors, the lawyers, the hospitals, the manufacturers. Right now it's too big. So, but I'm always searching for the next story. And sometimes I'll get it online with a news magazine online, and I'll print that, I'll clip. I have big files of notes I've taken for 20 years for a story. And after about 20 years, if the story hadn't been written, forget about it. It's not going to work, okay? And so I'll eventually forget about that. But the good ideas really stick, and they become novels eventually. And then once I start the writing, and I don't start writing a book until I've got the whole thing outlined, and chapter 1 through chapter 40.
Isn't it?
And that's not what writers like to hear. Most writers lie and say they don't believe in outlining, but you kind of have to.
I've read some of those books that they didn't believe in outlining. Sometimes they don't hold together.
So have I, and they could have used a real good outline because you get lost. Writers are notorious for having these brilliant ideas. Okay, just a great idea for the great opening scene, a great character, or something really captivating, a suspense novel, and they love it, and they jump in and they write like crazy for 6 months, and it's so much fun. But then suddenly they wake up one day and they don't know where to go. They've written themselves in a corner and they can't get to the end of it. I have friends who do it all the time. and we have these, debates about how you approach the craft of planning a story. And so I don't write. One of my rules of popular fiction is never write the first scene until you know the last scene. I did a writer gig with John Irving in Toronto just before COVID. And I had read somewhere that John Irving said he doesn't write the first sentence until he writes the last one. He writes the last one first. Well, I'm not quite that smart, but I do know the last scene. And if you know that, it's very difficult to get lost along the way. And it makes you see the whole novel. It makes you realize what you're going to need, what you don't need. Maybe you need another character. Maybe you don't need that subplot that's going to be too. Anyway, it's just a process. But once that's all planned, then the book is so much easier to write. I can write it in 6 months. So that's something I keep telling myself, and I keep telling aspiring writers. There are two very unpleasant aspects of writing a book, a novel, in popular fiction. Number one is the planning, the outlining, and number two are the revisions. Nobody wants to do revisions after you're finished, and those are two of the most important things that you have to do.
So speaking of that editing process, when you've done that, do you have readers who go back to see if the story holds together?
Well, you mean?
Is there something? Do they come in and actually help you just read it to say, this doesn't make sense? Why I'm asking is that your books hold together, and I find I've been asking. Diana Hamilton and I were talking about why is the public so hungry for your books? Why can't we wait for your next book? We all want to know. If 2 a year, we'd be thrilled. But God bless you.
God love all those wonderful fans out there.
Yeah, but you do. I mean, there are so many. God love them for all kinds of reasons. But is it? I feel that it's that that your stories hold together. That there is this clear feeling of right and wrong in them. And not I don't want to say that it gets it without, but we're entertained. We're not aware of that while we're reading it. But when I finish your book, it feels satisfying. Is that because it holds together?
Sure, and it holds together because
Unlike my question.
No, it holds together because of the ability to tell stories in a clear way, without being too complicated, and also being able to string the reader along with a lot of suspense. The first challenge is to hook the reader very early on and get the reader really involved with the book and turning pages. And I want people losing sleep and calling in sick for work and lying to their spouses. That's what I want my readers to do. Building up to an ending that's it's not predictable, but it's satisfying. I get really irritated when people say, I had that figured out halfway through. Well, maybe you did, you probably didn't. But the difficult part is the narrative tension that's 300 pages in the middle. That's where it takes a lot of work, and there are certain ways to do that to keep, and you can't leave the reader hanging on a cliff after the end of every chapter. That's an old trick. I do it sometimes. But it's just storytelling, and I can't tell you, I don't know where I learned it. It's hard to teach.
I believe that part of that is you are a born storyteller. I mean, it's a craft, too, that you have developed, but it's also there is a level of born storytelling. Yeah,
I learned something when I was a lawyer from a very good old-fashioned trial lawyer in Mississippi, and there were some great ones that I sort of, admired. And I watched him try a case one time, and I was spellbound by this guy in the courtroom. And he started off the case he represented an injured plaintiff in a big product case, and it's sort of a complicated case, and he went first. He had the jury for 30 minutes, and he just told the story of what his client had been through, what happened to his client, what the product was, what went wrong. And he humanized the person, beautifully, and sort of demonized the manufacturer. But it was storytelling, And by the time he finished with the opening statement, the trial was basically over. He had everybody right where he wanted them. And they settled the case the next day for a lot of money. And so we were talking about it later, and I said, that was brilliant. I mean, do you do every case you do that? He said, yeah. He said, I worked on that opening statement for weeks and months. So he said, I videoed myself. I did it in front of my wife, in front of my staff. I knew it inside and out. I knew every word of that opening statement. And I thought, that's how you do it. Well, that's how you tell a story. Again, it goes back to preparation. It doesn't just happen. You know, with writing, you have to keep the suspense going for a long time. That takes effort up front.
Well, thanks for the effort. Circle back, we kind of skipped over some more of that writing process. Is there any, you said that you write every day. You write even when you're traveling. So you wrote today?
I wrote 300 words in the hotel room this morning, yeah, because I didn't want to. Normally I won't if I'm traveling, but it is January, and I get a lot of work done in January, February, and March because, you know, your days are shorter, or getting longer, but the weather's not as nice. You know, there's not much stuff going on. And I've just learned that I've got to really knuckle down big time those 3 months because there are more distractions coming in the spring and summer. So and I love it when I get started. After all the planning, preparation, thinking, outlining, all that kind of stuff, getting started is a lot of fun. It's still a lot of fun. You know, writing these stories, I'm having far too much fun, and so I want to get a lot done this month and next month and in March. So. There won't be many down days in January. I aim for 1,000 words a day. Sometimes I get more, sometimes I get less, but I'm always thinking about the next scene. I mean, I know exactly where the story is and what happened today and what the next scene is going to be and how it should be told and from whose point of view and what the dialogue is going to be. I'll recite the dialogue, you know, driving down the road. Just, you know, does this sound right or whatever? And then when I actually write it, after every sentence, I stop and say it out loud. I say it out loud to make sure it sounds the way I want it to sound. And I'm not, Ann won't like this, I don't really care about grammar. I make a lot of mistakes with grammar. So they catch some they don't catch, some I don't care if they catch. Some are intentional, but I'll sacrifice grammar if it sounds better. My way. So I'm always kind of mouthing the story and living the story.
Is that back to the copy editors? Do they try to correct your grammar when it was intentional?
Oh, we've had some huge fights when they would intentionally, without asking me. It doesn't happen very often, but they'll get a little bit too heavy-handed and start making corrections, and we have a fight, and then we, you know, kiss and make up, but that's part of the process.
Well, I'm sure they like all of them. Are there rituals that you have when you write? I mean, do you have this back at home when you're writing in your office? Are there some kind of rituals that you have to have kind of around you to make that process flow?
It's one spot in a little office behind the house. It's the old summer kitchen. The house is 200 years old, and it's an old plantation farmhouse in Virginia that's been renovated over the years. And the summer kitchen was a small building behind the house where they would actually cook and take the food to the main. They were terrified of fires, so they wouldn't cook in the house. And it was ramshackle when we bought the place 30 years ago. There was no roof on it. And so my wife, who loves to renovate old buildings, fixed it up for me a long time ago as my office. And it's kind of dark, not too many windows, no phone, no fax, no internet, no music, no interruptions from 7 to about 11 every morning. It's very much a ritual. Same kind of coffee, black coffee that I brew every morning. It's got to be the same time. Yeah, so there's a little ritual. Yeah. So
do you go straight there? Do you go straight there, have your coffee, and start writing first thing in the morning, or do you?
We get up at 6 out of habit. I wish I could sleep later, but we can't. And then we have coffee together, the first cup, as we sit and kind of stare at each other. Renee, pre-coffee is not something you want to deal with, okay? She's got to have the first cup of coffee, and we don't talk much. And then the second cup, she kind of comes to life, and we'll talk about the day and the kids and grandkids. And in basketball, we have, she's an obnoxious Tar Heel fan. Most of them are obnoxious, with good reason. But we have season tickets to UNC in Chapel Hill. We live in Charlottesville. Our son went to UVA. Our daughter went to UNC. So we have season tickets to the UVA home games. And so it's almost, at least twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, watching basketball.
You have good seats too, because every once in a while it'll pan to you on the front row there.
We're courtside.
That's one of the benefits of being.
We're courtside. I know every referee in the ACC, and I know the good ones and the bad ones. And I try to talk to all of them, not in a bad way, but we're always trying to, some will talk back, some like to engage you, some totally ignore you, and those are the ones we really give a hard time to. It's the refs are a lot of fun, but we never talk to the players. Some of the fans yell nasty stuff at the players for the opposing teams, and I don't like that. We don't do that. But basketball is a big deal. Went to the Final Four last year with UNC in New Orleans, and had a wonderful time. We've been to. Good thing about UNC, you get to go to the Final Four all the time, unlike most schools. So we go to Sweet 16s and Final Fours, and if there's a team there, so that's a big part of our winter between now and the first weekend in April. So I do lose hours because of basketball. I could be writing, but after so many books, I know what I can do.
How many books?
I think it's 47.
Wow. Something
like that, 48. But who's counting? But yeah, I mean, I know how much I can do sometimes the last 2 weeks, you really have to grind it out, put in more hours, but not very often.
How many of those books have been adapted into film?
I've had 10 books adapted to film. 8 were feature films. 1, A Painted House, was a TV movie, Hallmark Hall of Fame classic. And then one, Innocent Man was a Netflix documentary. That's the most recent thing. I've had 8 feature films. I've not had one made in 15 years. And it's not from lack of trying. I want them all filmed. I've been very lucky with Hollywood. I mean, if you look at those early movies from 30 years ago.
I think we all remember The Firm when it came out.
That was 30 years ago in the summer of 1993, if you can believe that. And Tom Cruise has not aged a bit. He still looks still looks 30 years old. But the early, in 91, 92, 93, from 92 to 95, those first 4 or 5 movies came out on top of the books. And it was The Firm, The Pelican Brief, and The Client came out in a span of 12 months, the movies did. And all 3 of those books went back to #1 in paperback. The Time to Kill stayed at #1. And then the Chamber came out. And it was okay as a book, not a very good movie. And then Rainmaker came out, then The Time to Kill came out. And that 5-year period, looking back, with the benefit of hindsight, it had a huge impact on the career. And those movies, as you know, are still on TV tonight, being enjoyed by people. People would stop me all the time and say, "Hey man, I don't read your books, I love your movies."
What do you say to that?
Just thank you. Thank you. I'm not going to get into this discussion about books versus movies with some guy on the street.
I will. I'll tell him the book is better. That's
the book is always better. Yeah. The book is always better. But I would love to have all of them adapted. We have probably 6 or 8 right now deals pending with TV and movies. Mm-hmm. There's always 6 or 7 or 8, and nothing ever happens. Nothing will be filmed this year. I don't think.
It's saturated right now, isn't it? They take the options, I guess that's what it's called,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
they don't actually get turned in.
Calico Joe is my only baseball book, and it was optioned by Bob Dylan.
What is he doing with it?
Good question.
Good question.
I thought he was a singer, but he likes baseball and likes movies. So, being Bob Dylan, he called my agent one day and said, "Hey, are the film rights available?" He had tried before. I didn't know it, but Calico Joe is on his fourth option deal. The option is 12 months or 18 months. They pay you a few bucks, and the option expires. You get the rights back. That happens to me every month, it seems like. And so we said, yeah, the film rights are available. So Bob Dylan, I haven't met him, bought the film rights. And being Bob Dylan, he said, okay, I want a big shot to direct this. So he called George Clooney. Well, George is going to answer the phone if Bob Dylan calls, okay? And so George he said, like the idea? He said, yeah. He said, I want you to write the movie, and I want you to direct the movie. And they struck a deal, and Clooney was, thought it was fun. And so George took off and wrote the screenplay, and wrote a great screenplay. He followed the novel, which is the least I can ask for, okay? Just stick to the book. And they're in the process now of, getting it adapted. I don't know when they're going to start filming. I have not seen a schedule or anything, so that may happen, but I don't know. A Time for Mercy was the third Jake Brigance book from Ford County, and Matthew McConaughey has signed up to do the movie. It's going to be it's supposed to be it's planned to be, alleged to be a 6-part HBO series.
Wow.
A big deal. Matthew has agreed to do it. I haven't seen the contract. But again, not much has happened in the past 6 months. So
At least he has the accent. He knows how to do the stuff.
He made the character famous in A Time to Kill because he's pretty good looking to begin with. Not a bad looking guy, okay? And when I wrote A Time to Kill, I was a small town lawyer in Mississippi, and I was living that life of the small town guy, dreaming of the big trial, the big courtroom drama, with a pretty young wife, young family, struggling to get ahead, and dreaming of a big courtroom career. That was me, very idealistic. In Mississippi, wanting to see changes, wanting progressive ideas, and so when I wrote it, it was very autobiographical, still is, because that's what I was living 35 years ago, and so I always kind of saw myself as Jake until Matthew came along. I said, "Okay, Matthew, you are now Jake. I'll surrender. You can have it." So that movie may happen if what I've realized with Hollywood, I can't do a thing. My last book was The Boys from Biloxi, came out in October. Not much interest so far. I can't do a thing physically today to get that movie made. If I could give away the film rights for free, which I'm not going to do, I could write the screenplay. Let's say I wrote a great screenplay. Give that away for free.
Do you write screenplays?
No, I don't know how to do it. I've tried. I can't do it. But I mean, I could do it. It probably wouldn't be very good. I mean, I could do all that kind of stuff. But beyond that, nothing's going to move the needle. Nothing I do is going to get that movie made.
Why?
And I knew that I realized it 20 years ago. So I've stopped worrying about that. It would be nice to have some cannot be adapted. Some of the stories cannot. But most of them would work well, I think, with television series or a 6-part series or whatever. I don't live in that world. It's just, it's frustrating, and so I just stay at home and write the books and hope that somebody else makes the movies.
Well, the booksellers are very happy if you keep writing books.
Don't worry. I'm under contract.
Yeah. Well, do you have a favorite movie? Adaptation?
Yeah, of mine?
Yours, yes. It's not just randomly, just...
when Francis Ford Coppola did Rainmaker, he's a writer. He's a very good writer, and he really respects writers. And he wanted me to write the first draft of the screenplay, which I did. I didn't want to, but he asked me to, and he took it, read it, and threw it in the trash. And so much for being a screenwriter. And then he wrote it. He wrote, he wrote the book. He just wrote the same story. And when I read his screenplay, I said, this is very faithful to the novel. That's the least I can ask for. And he wanted me, they filmed in Memphis, and they had young Matt Damon, Danny DeVito, John Voight, Claire Danes, Danny Glover. It was a great cast. And he said, he called one day, said, you got to come to Memphis tomorrow. They had a big old warehouse where they had the sound stage, and he said, we're going to read through the entire script tomorrow with the entire cast. And I said, sure. So I flew to Memphis, and we all got around a big table. The entire cast, and Coppola is, being Coppola, in total control of everything, except for Danny DeVito, who does not take controls very nice. He doesn't like to be controlled, and he doesn't believe in following a script. He likes to make things up, And he had a big black cigar about that long that was stinking up. This was 1995, stinking up the whole room, no windows. And he would stomp around the table, smoking the cigar, and comment on everybody else's dialogue. And it was hilarious. And Coppola kept trying to get him back in the chair, And this went on like 3 hours. And at the very end, they asked me to read the jury's final verdict, okay, that I'd written in the book. And Coppola used the exact language in the script, and I blew it. Okay, I got it wrong. But Coppola wanted me on this set all the time to drink cappuccino with him. He had his own souped-up cappuccino machine, and he said, "Let's just sit here and do the scene, and we'll have some more coffee." And after a couple of days of that, I said, "I'm not going to do this anymore. There's nothing more boring than watching a movie being filmed. It's one tedious take after another, and it's glamorous when it's all done, if it works, but making it is not any fun." So that was my last time on a movie set.
So you've hung out with a lot of very famous faces. We talked about this a little bit earlier, about that you said you have the best of both worlds, that you're not that recognizable. In our bookstore earlier today, you very graciously came by and signed lots and lots of books. So I have to do a little plug. The books out here are signed. The books at the cocktail party tonight are going to be signed, and we will.
And they're out there for sale, by the way, on those.
And you get first dibs on them. Yes, and you get first dibs on them.
Let's sell some books here.
Let's sell some books, right? But when you were in the bookstore, you're sitting there at a big desk, and people are walking in and going, and they're rushing over because to see you, and standing behind you and taking pictures and asking you to sign autographs. But in general, you said that you're not that recognizable on the street, that you kind of live a normal life, right?
It's very normal. People recognize me in bookstores.
The best people.
Most people don't hang out in bookstores. Yeah. And I joke, and I've said this for a long time, I'm a famous writer in a country where nobody reads. And so there's a little bit of truth in that. But I walked up and down the streets in Charleston today, and nobody said a word. And that's the story of my life. I'm very rarely recognized. At ACC basketball games sometimes, there's a guy who used to coach at Clemson, then he went to Texas, now he's at Tennessee. His name is Rick Barnes. And we favor each other a lot, okay? We'd never met. But around tournament time in March, Chapel Hill or Charlottesville, somebody's going to stop and say, "Rick Barnes?" Sorry, missed that one.
Oh, okay. I can one-up you on that. So Sunday, just this past Sunday, we had the privilege of being the booksellers for David Baldacci, friend of yours,
friend of mine, yeah.
Another writer. He was at the Mary Alice Monroe weekend, and he told me to tell you hello, and told a very funny story that he was in a restaurant, and this woman came running up to him, just adoringly said, is it you? Is it really you? And so he said, well, yes, it's me. And then she went running back and she saw her husband. She said, I told you it was John Grisham. Isn't that awesome? And then she brought back over your book to David Baldacci and asked him to sign it. And he said she was so happy that he just went ahead and signed it.
Oh, yeah.
So somewhere out there's a John Grisham book.
John Meacham, a historian, I know him pretty well. He hangs out in Charlottesville a lot. He lives in Nashville. And he tells a story. He's told it way too many times. He told it at Barbara Bush's funeral. He spoke at Barbara Bush's funeral. He got to know the Bushes real close when he did the big book on Big George. And he was leaving the National Book Festival on the mall in Washington. And this lady saw him and just practically screamed. And she said, I can't believe I finally met you, okay? My book's right here in my car. Will you just please stand here and give me 5 minutes to get my book so you can autograph it? He said, sure. He was kind of flattered. And she ran back over the copy of The Runaway Jury. And he
so
said,
this is a common thing amongst you writers, okay.
But they don't recognize me. I get misrecognized. Okay?
There you go.
And he said, sure. He signed best wishes, so John Grisham. And she took the book. Don't burst her bubble, good grief.
We always worry a little bit in bookstores, when someone comes in and says, I'm the author, may I sign my books? And they just start taking them off. I'm like, can we see some identification? Anyway, I think it usually works out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to shift gears just a little bit because as your books are so highly entertaining, all of them. They're page turners. We can't put them down, and I think that's. I think you're actually getting a whole new generation of new readers who are suffering from reader's block. I mean, I don't know if any of you suffered with that during COVID, but it's difficult to pay attention. We talk about being present now. We talk about meditating, and reading is truly a form of meditation. If you're there with a physical book, it's all you can be doing. And so it's the power of reading is so important. And again, I don't exactly know how to articulate, so bear with me, and then you can help pull this out. But books and art are a reflection at once. They're a reflection of our culture, and they're also a catalyst for that. And I've been reading your books my entire adult life, and I think while I'm being entertained, there was also to have read A Time to Kill, to talk about social injustice, to talk about incarceration, unjust incarceration, to the things that are going wrong, the things that are bad inside of your books, the evil, the dark part of it. Are you aware that you are doing this, that you are both reflecting and also being a catalyst for change, even just thought, the thought change in culture? I'm not articulating this well, but I...
Yeah, it's difficult to sit where I sit, and realize the impact that I may have on other people through my books. I'm not really in contact with that many people who are reading the books. I get a lot of mail, and most of it's very pleasant, and I get some feedback. But it's still, we can't see how others view us. I don't care what you're doing in life. You can't really see how others perceive you, and it's certainly true with this, with writing, successful writing. What I am aware of though is certain books deal with certain issues, and the best books I write are the books where I take an issue, whether it's capital punishment or wrongful conviction or insurance fraud or whatever the issue may be, and weave a compelling story around that issue. And so when the reader's finally finished the book, exhausted, I hope, the reader says, I haven't thought about that issue before like that. Now you can't you certainly can't assume that your readers share your politics. So you can't stay on the soapbox very, very long. I don't care what you're writing about. So you kind of have to present a balanced, although when you're writing about wrongful convictions, and I do that all the time, probably done it too much, but I'm not going to quit. It's pretty obvious where my sentiments lie. Same with capital punishment, same with a lot of issues I write about, mass incarceration and a lot of different things I write about, environmental destruction, whatever. But making the reader more aware of a problem is rewarding to raise that level. Years ago, I wrote a book called The Street Lawyer, set in Washington, D.C. A big firm guy cracks up and goes to work for a legal aid clinic and represents people who are homeless. And the issue was all about homelessness in America and in specifically Washington, D.C. And it was one of the better books I've written. And it was published 25 years ago. And I started getting letters from homeless centers around the country who were getting checks from readers who were touched by the issue. And I got these really nice letters from people saying, thanks for writing the book and illuminating the problem we deal with daily, trying to provide food for these people. So it's kind of rewarding. I wrote a book called The Guardians, the one I set in Savannah, about wrongful convictions. And at the end, I thanked a friend of mine who runs an innocence organization called Centurion Ministries. And I said, in my author's note, I said, if you have a few bucks, send them a check. And they got a lot of checks. They got a lot of checks. So yeah, it can have an impact, but again, it's impossible to gauge the impact.
Makes me think about your Innocence Project. Are you on the board of that, the Innocence Project? Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's one Innocence Project in New York that is the anchor, the main Innocence Project, and we litigate in all 50 states and have a big staff and a lot of lawyers, and we raise money for that. There are probably any given time 45 to 50 other freestanding innocence projects around the country. Most of them are attached to law schools, and anybody can start one. One of my favorite stories is a lady in New Orleans was the forewoman of a jury, and they convicted a guy of murder and gave him the death penalty in Louisiana. And not long after that, it unraveled, the truth came out, and the cops had lied, and the prosecutor had lied. The jury had been totally misled. And she was furious. She was livid, okay? She'd been hoodwinked. She sold her family business and started the Innocence Project in New Orleans as a freestanding nonprofit.
This was a member of the jury who started it?
The forewoman of the jury.
Wow, okay.
And so she funded initially the Innocence Project of New Orleans. It's a freestanding, not attached to a law school, not affiliated with anybody, so it's its own nonprofit. And she hired some lawyers, investigators, and whatever. And they've walked out probably 25 innocent people from Angola prison in Louisiana in the last 25 years. That's just one story of a freestanding innocence project. There's an innocence network where all of the groups come together and help each other out. But for the heavy lifting, the firepower, it comes out of New York. There's a great the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project based in D.C. has got probably 35 exonerations. The Midwest Innocence Project has probably got 20 exonerations. These groups have been around. There's not enough money. There's never enough money to fund them all, but we're trying. So I'm really involved with that.
Yeah.
And thank you. Thank you. And it's not. Texas is no worse than New York. Is no worse than California. It's all 50 states. Wrongful convictions happen every day in this country. There are thousands of innocent people in prison right now that we're trying to get out, and there's no way we can get them out because most cases do not involve DNA proof. There's no blood, semen, hair, whatever at the scene to have the conclusive biological proof that this person did it. The Innocence Project in New York, we take only DNA cases. And believe it or not, those are the easiest ones to solve if you can get DNA testing and have a sample of the DNA. We have, I think our number is 375 exonerations by DNA. And several dozen of those are on death row.
And goes in both directions, right? So it helps to exonerate, but then also helps to convict.
Yeah, well, sure.
Yeah.
Police and prosecutors, and almost all of them are good people, okay? But they're just too many bad apples. But nowadays, they can't wait to use DNA testing, to help solve a crime. But at the same time, they will fight you to test your client who's been in prison for 10 years and claims he's innocent, okay? But then we have a DNA test. They just always, they're so afraid of being exposed. And the stakes are so great that they just can't agree to cooperate. It's very rare. So we litigate. We litigate, we fight, and one of my only non-fiction book was The Innocent Man. It highlights 2 murders in a small town in Oklahoma. And one of those murders, one guy is still, the first 2 were DNA exonerated, and the real killer was nailed. He's serving life without parole. The other murder, one guy's been out for 3 years, and the 4th guy, my buddy Tommy Ward, is still in prison 37 years later. We're pen pals. We write each other all the time. Christmas cards, birthday cards. He sends cards to my grandkids, and I can't get him out. And we've tried everything. There's no DNA. We've tried. We spent a fortune, investigators, lawyers, everything, trying to get Tommy out of prison, and we can't do it.
You discovered him through the Innocence Projects or through the research for the book?
Research for the book. When I took off to Oklahoma to research the main murder, the one I'd read about, I was fascinated by this wrongful conviction because the guy came within 5 days of being executed in Oklahoma, completely innocent. And I love the story because the guy was the 2nd-round draft pick of the Oakland A's in the 1973 free agent draft. That was my year. I didn't get drafted either, okay? So nobody ever called me. I never talked to a scout. But we were the same age. We played baseball. We're from the same roughly part of the world, same background, same religion, same everything. He was from Oklahoma. I grew up in Arkansas. And I said, how can the town turn on this guy and convict him and frame him for a murder he had nothing to do with? And they did. He got convicted with a bogus trial, bogus witnesses, bogus everything, bogus science. And he came within 5 days. And it's a fascinating case. That's why I wrote the book. And
so that's your nonfiction book.
That's nonfiction.
The only nonfiction book you've written. Is that going to feed into any future novels, fictionalized?
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to keep pursuing the fictionalized version of wrongful convictions. The thing about a wrongful conviction, and I've been saying this for 16 years, since I discovered wrongful convictions, okay? I didn't know they existed when I was a young lawyer, because I never had a client I thought was wrongfully convicted. We had a good system. We had good judges, good prosecutors, good cops, and I never thought you could have a problem with this. I didn't believe that there are a lot of innocent people in prison. But when I got into it, I realized that it's a huge problem. So I've probably written too much about it, but every wrongful conviction case is a fantastic story from a storytelling point of view because of the immense human suffering, injustice, corruption, maddening corruption by the cops, by the authorities, okay? Some of the things they do is you can't believe it, okay?
It's like truth is crazier than fiction.
You can't make up some of the stuff that we discover in these cases that are wrongful convictions, and so I still lose sleep over wrongful convictions. That's why I serve on the board. That's why I write about them. That's why I speak about them, and because there's something just so inherently wrong in a legal system that we take great pride in, we think it's the best in the world, and a criminal justice system that we take great pride in, we think it's really good. There's so many problems in it that we could fix if we had the political will to do it. If we just said, okay, let's fix the problems. But we don't do that. We don't do it. We still elect judges and prosecutors, which is a horrible idea, because politics enter the prosecutions at times, and politics enter the judge's decisions. But there are a lot of things we can do, and that's not going to change. We're not going to stop electing judges in this country. But there are a lot of things that a lot of laws we could pass that would prevent almost all wrongful convictions. But it's frustrating for me as I guess as a lawyer, as a former politician, now as a writer, to see these problems that we can't. There's just too much injustice, and we can't fix it all. But it makes for great reading.
Does make for good reading. And circle back to kind of wrap things up here is why we're here tonight. 275th year for the Charleston Library Society. That we know that it is, Ann Cleveland has opened the doors, and so that we're spending more and more time with authors reading new books, the conversations that are had within the Library Society and the bookstore. We talk often about it, cultivating our community, but it's also cultivating our consciousness. So we watch all the time how books change our thoughts, change the direction that our community is going. Can we just ask you to talk a little bit about what that means to you? I know you're such a great supporter of independent bookstores and of libraries.
Yeah, when I was a kid, the first 7 years of my life, my father was a sharecropper in Arkansas, and because his father was a sharecropper, and life was pretty rough. Not rough. We had enough, but we didn't have much. And when I was 7, my parents literally packed us up in the middle of the night, and we fled the farm. It took my father 10 years to pay all of his farm debts. And I was 17 years old when he told me, he said, I paid the last grocery bill from 10 years ago. That's the kind of guy he was. But we got away from that, and we started moving around to small towns. My father got a job as a bulldozer operator for a very good company, and they would move us like every other year to in the summertime, to a different job. And the first thing we would do was go join the local Baptist church, because my mom would march us down the aisle. And then the second thing was check out the library. And we could judge the quality of life in any small town based on the number of library books you could check out at one time. And I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and we'd take a stack of library books home. And my mom didn't like television, and we read books. We passed them around, and we would see who could read all the books first. But library books were a huge part of my life. When A Time to Kill came out in 1989, we lived in a suburb of Memphis in Mississippi, across the state line. And we did not have a decent bookstore. We had a very nice library. And by then, I was a member of the state legislature. And so I always took care of funding for libraries. That was my little pet peeve. And I went to my librarian, a guy I knew pretty well, and I said, look, I want to have a book party. I got this novel coming out. He rolled his eyes, and I said, can I have a book party here at the library? I've got plenty of books.
This was the first book.
For A Time to Kill, yeah. They printed 5,000 hardback copies, and I bought 1,000. And I thought I'm going to make money on the front end by, buying it wholesale, sell it retail. Maybe get some royalties on the back end. I had it all figured out. And so they sent me 1,000 copies of A Time to Kill, and it just took over my law office. There's boxes everywhere. So we had the big party at the library, and we got some publicity and ran some ads, and I just knew I was really concerned about whether or not I had enough books, 1,000. And we have pictures of my kids. This was in '89, so my son was 6, my daughter was 3, of them climbing on the stacks of books, A Time to Kill. And we had a big party. Big crowd showed up. And when the party was over, I still owned 882 copies of A Time.
I didn't know what number you were going to give, but I said, I have a feeling it's a lot.
Which means we sold 120, which is a huge, I realized later, that's a huge night. And I had this invoice coming for the books. So another, financial disaster on my end. And I went back to my librarian and I said, hey, buddy, I can take this show on the road if you got any friends. He said, sure. And so I contacted libraries all across the state of Mississippi. And the smaller the town and the library, the bigger the crowd. They'd never met a writer before, okay? They show up and punch in cookies, and I'd sell, 30 or 40 books or not. The weirdest thing, I was in a nice-sized town one time with a nice library, and there was no traffic, and I'm sitting there by myself, whichever writer goes through this, and this gentleman walks up and picks up A Time to Kill, and we're talking, and one of the librarians walk over, so I'm talking to her while this guy's reading, and it's kind of awkward because he's reading, and he read pretty fast, and then when he finished the first chapter, he closed the book and put it back on the table and walked out. And did not like the first chapter, and didn't buy the book, and I didn't sell a book that day. So anyway, I finally, after 35 libraries, I got the invoice paid off, and I kept about 150 copies of A Time to Kill. They're buried in the backyard now. And, so listen,
they're probably worth quite a bit of money right now.
Libraries were a huge part of my life as a kid, but also as a writer. And then when the firm came out, things were different. There was money for a big tour. Back in those days in '91, still the author tour was huge, and publishers would pay for it. They'd pay good money to fly you all over the country to go to the great bookstores and the stores that can turn out a crowd. And there were a lot of them back then. A lot more independent bookstores back then than now. And you would go to Tattered Cover in Denver, Powell's in Portland, all these great stores, and have a signing, and you'd have 100 people there. Big deal. The big thing was to get interview. The local press would show up, and you'd coverage. And it was, that was the author tour. And so the bookstores, unlike now, bookstores are crucial. Back then, your success was determined by your initial success by your independent bookstores. If they got behind a book, and they were ferocious about getting behind books. They read, they knew the books, they knew their customers, and they would hand sell the books. And that's what launched a lot of careers. It was crucial for me with the firm. By the time the next book came out, it was. I didn't need to tour that much. Things had changed considerably, but that's why I'm so loyal to independent bookstores. We don't, as you know, we don't have many left. We have 3,000 fewer bookstores now than we had 20 years ago. What was the other chain that closed? Borders. Borders closed overnight. It was 700 stores. We lost 700 stores just like that overnight.
Well, it used to be that some of those chains operated a bit like an independent bookstore. If they had a strong manager, if they had if they were run in a certain way, they kind of replaced an independent bookstore for that. But thankfully, it's a renaissance for independent bookstores right now. And we're in such a, I think most of you may know this, but maybe you don't. And it's a good time to say that we were invited in this kind of wonderful moment when I had already shared with John about when Ann Cleveland knew that Julian and I were looking for a new location for Buxton Books, an events-motivated, sales-motivated bookstore. Most of what we do is outside of the footprint of the store.
Right.
When we do pop-up shops and we go around. But Ann Cleveland invited us, she and the board invited us to 160 King Street to have the bookstore. And what an extraordinary thing that was, not just for Polly and Julian Buxton and for Buxton Books, but really for the community. I mean, it really is to have an independent bookstore in that section of Charleston, how quickly the community of Charleston, the locals, embraced us, and we became their bookstore. And it's just been a really powerful shift, certainly in my life, but I believe in the community of Charleston, that towns need bookstores, and we really like it when John Grisham comes. So on behalf of the Charleston Library Society and Buxton Books and the community of Charleston, we hope that you will come back. And,
wow. Well, the full court press is on.
Yeah, it's full court press.
I thought Ann Cleveland
If we start now, we can have you by 2033 again.
I thought Ann was tough. I'm getting the full court press right now.
Well, it's just been such a pleasure and honor, and we're just so thankful that you were here for this very wonderfully special day, 275th annual meeting, as we go into the next chapter. So
my pleasure. Happy to be here. Always.
Yes.